Welcome back to the deep dive. We take that stack of sources you share with us and we try to boil them down, really get to the core insights, giving you that shortcut to being, well, informed. Today we are doing frankly, a deeply chilling deep dive, but it's analytically necessary, I think. We're looking into the life and crimes of Dennis Rader,
Right.
a figure whose public normalcy just made his sadistic acts almost unthinkable. You definitely know him by his chilling, self-selected alias, BTK.
Yeah, Rader's just such an immediate and, well, profound contradiction. He wasn't some shadowy hermit or, an obvious outcast. Not at all.
No.
He really seemed like the epitome of the stable, average American guy, a church leader, husband, father, all while secretly carrying out these 10 horrific murders over almost 20 years.
Let's just ground this in the essential facts right away. The alias, BTK, it stands for bind, torture, kill.
Chillingly direct.
He was active mostly between 1974 and 1991, mainly in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Then there was this dramatic resurgence in the early 2000s, which ultimately is what led to his capture in 2005.
And 10 confirmed victims during that time.
10. So our mission today specifically is to look past the sheer violence, horrific as it was, and really examine Rader's process. The sources really frame him not as this figure driven by, random psychological chaos, which is kind of the common assumption about serial killers.
Right, that's the trope. But Rader, he was different. He was driven by this perverse, almost administrative order. Meticulous.
Exactly. We're dissecting his methodology, his absolute compulsion for documentation, and this terrifying structural link between his, frankly, entirely respectable suburban career in municipal government and the sadism he practiced in secret.
We're analyzing the bureaucrat of sadism. That's really the angle here. The killer who managed murder like it was some kind of long-term project he had to oversee.
It's unsettling. Okay, so to really get the shock that, it must have just ripped through the Wichita community when Rader was finally caught. We have to start with the mask, the one he built and maintained for decades.
Yeah.
The sources are pretty unified on this, describing him as, quote, the perfect American citizen on paper. So how deep did this suburban facade actually go?
Oh, it was remarkably deep.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't just a passive identity, like he just happened to fit in. It was proactive. He actively curated it.
How so?
Well, Rader wasn't just a husband and father in the suburbs. He actively sought out roles that gave him moral authority, community leadership.
Like what?
He was a church deacon. Then eventually he became the president of his church council. He even served as a Cub Scout leader for a time.
Wow. So positions of trust, deeply embedded in the community's sort of moral fabric.
Exactly. These roles put him right at the center of that framework. People looked up to him, trusted his judgment.
And this dedication to civic roles, it didn't just give him cover, did it? It seems like it gave him a measure of, institutional authority, too.
Absolutely.
Which is where his day job comes in, right? He was the municipal compliance officer for Park City, the local government's rule enforcer, basically.
Precisely. And that job is key. This really high level of visible, proactive community engagement meant people just inherently trusted him. They relied on him to manage order.
Whether that was, moral order in the church or civic order in the city with the rules and regulations.
Yes. And this provided the ideal, virtually impenetrable cover for a man who was secretly obsessed with ritualized control. He was the ultimate rule setter and rule enforcer, both in public and, horrifyingly, in private.
It's terrifying when you frame it like that this image, this upstanding citizen thing, it wasn't just a handy disguise. It actually might have fed the underlying pathology itself.
Oh, I think it absolutely did.
Was that constant negotiation of community rules, the expectations, was that essential for his sense of self, do you think?
It seems central, yeah. The sources suggest the image of the good citizen gave him two crucial things. First, obviously, the perfect psychological buffer. Nobody suspects the church council president, right?
Right.
But second, it gave him a constant stream of, let's call it, low-stakes authority. Power, but socially acceptable power.
Okay.
His pathology, it seems, rooted in this profound ego, this need for ultimate control. And he fulfilled that need on two parallel tracks. One was totally socially acceptable, even lauded. The other was monstrously violent.
So let's look at how that need for meticulous control showed up in the actual crimes. We know these weren't impulsive acts, not at all. How extensive was the planning?
Oh, the planning was huge. It was a major part of the cycle for him. Rader apparently derived immense satisfaction just from the planning phase itself. It could last for months.
Months. Wow.
Yeah. This period is sometimes called his trophy hunting phase in the sources. He'd stalk potential victims, meticulously learn their routines, map out entry and exit points. He even sometimes pre-selected specific items of clothing he wanted the victim to be wearing during the act itself. He thought of it as a staged performance.
That phrase, staging them like performances, that's really powerful. What did that actually involve? It sounds like a level of, I don't know, directorial oversight that goes way beyond typical violent crime.
It really did. The whole event, from start to finish, was scripted in his mind to fulfill these complex, sadomasochistic fantasies he had, fantasies that centered entirely on his power to bind, to torture, and ultimately to decide their fate.
And the performance, it didn't end with the murder itself, did it?
No, not at all. After the murder, Rader would often pose the bodies, sometimes moving them to a specific spot in the house that had significance for him, or he'd take photographs of the scene he'd created.
Photograph?
Yes. These photos, along with maybe items of clothing or jewelry he took those, became his personal trophy collection. They served as proof, confirmation of his total dominance over that moment, and they gave him material to, well, reinforce the fantasy later on.
So the victim selection wasn't about personal anger or some spontaneous rage. It was about finding someone who represented symbolically the right kind of vulnerability for him, someone over whom he could exert this absolute documented control.
Exactly that. The victims were often strangers, or maybe slight acquaintances. People who represented the possibility of enacting his perfect scenario, a scenario where Dennis Rader was the sole director, the only one managing the consequences.
And the act, for him, wasn't truly complete until he had the records, the physical trophies, the photos, all secured, filed away, ready for him to review later.
Right. The documentation was part of the ritual itself. And this brings us right to the core contradiction, the thing that makes Rader so, well, unique and disturbing in the annals of criminal history. His psychology wasn't defined by chaos. It was defined by organization.
Right. The traditional image of a serial killer, it often involves profound disorganization, right? Impulsive, messy.
Exactly. But Rader's pathology, it was driven by this rigid order, structure, procedure. It's quite different.
This is where Rader's own words about it become really important.
Yeah.
He talked about the compulsion as if it were separate from him. He said, and this is a quote, "When this monster entered my brain, I will never know, but it's here to stay." So if that monster doesn't represent chaotic madness, like a split personality in the classic sense, what did it symbolize for Rader, according to the sources?
Well, the analysis in the sources is pretty clear that the monster wasn't some manifestation of psychosis or, true madness. It was really about intense narcissistic ego, an ego demanding total satisfaction and absolute control.
Oh, okay.
The pathology existed entirely in this meticulously maintained tension between his two organized selves. You had Dennis the dad, the guy structured by church bylaws and city zoning codes.
Right, the rule follower.
And then you had BTK, the director of death, who was structured by his own personal rules of engagement, his own documentation protocols. Neither self was allowed to descend into chaos. Both were highly structured.
That tension is it's fascinating and horrifying. Let's dig into that connection with his day job more. He spent his workdays as a compliance officer, the ultimate arbiter of micro-order, you could say.
Yeah.
Issuing citations for things like, overgrown lawns and stray dogs. I mean, it sounds incredibly mundane.
It is mundane, and that's precisely the point. That mundane professional microcontrol perfectly mirrored the total meticulous control he exerted in his sadistic life.
How so? What's the link?
Think about the common thread in both roles. They're both systems of consequence management.
Consequence management. Okay, explain that.
Well, in his municipal job, if you broke the rule, say, your lawn was too high, the consequence is straightforward. Citation may be a fine. Order restored.
Right. Bureaucratic consequence.
Yeah. And in his role as BTK, if a victim was deemed, appropriate for his ritual, the consequence for simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, according to his rules, was torture and death.
So in both arenas, Rader saw himself as the ultimate authority, the one who sets the rules, identifies the transgression, whether it's a stray dog or horrifically an unlocked door, and then administers the consequence.
Exactly. And the sources suggest he derives satisfaction from enforcing this binary state.
Yeah.
You either comply or you face punishment. Order must be maintained, his order.
So the administrative function itself, that power to define what is in compliance and what isn't, That was the real source of his perverse gratification, regardless of the scale, lawn length, or life and death.
It seems that way. This procedural focus really sets him apart from many other infamous killers.
How so?
Well, we often try to categorize serial killers, right? Organized versus disorganized is a common model. Rader kind of sits in his own unique category, the procedural killer.
Procedural. Okay.
Contrast him with someone like Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer's crimes were driven by highly disorganized, impulsive fantasy. The scenes were chaotic. Or think about Ted Bundy. Magnetic, charming, highly mobile, opportunistic in a different way.
Right. Very different profiles.
Rader was the opposite of those archetypes. He was slow, methodical, deeply rooted in one place, and fundamentally administrative in his approach. He archived everything. He logged his activities. He documented murder. His system was one of bureaucratic terror.
Bureaucratic terror. Okay, let's expand on this idea. You called him a serial killer with a filing cabinet. What specific examples did the sources give about this administration of his acts?
The level of detail is really quite astonishing. He didn't just, grab some rope and duct tape on the way out the door. Not at all.
Yeah.
He created meticulous, purpose-built hit kits. These were often put together months in advance. They were labeled, cataloged, stored carefully, sometimes apparently right alongside his municipal compliance records. Just another set of organizational tools for another project.
Labeled and cataloged hit kits alongside city paperwork. That's deeply unsettling. What was in these kits?
Specific items he'd pre-selected, binding materials of different types and strengths, various cutting instruments, other tools he might need, all selected and prepared, almost like he was getting ready for an important audit or inspection.
Right.
Everything had its place.
What does that labeling tell us about his mindset? Was it purely logistical, like this rope is for this type of binding, or was it part of the ritual itself?
I think the sources suggest it was both. Logistical, definitely. It suggests the project management approach, right? He wasn't relying on memory. He was relying on his system, his documentation, which in turn probably confirmed to his narcissistic ego that this was a serious professional endeavor he was undertaking, not just messy violence. And furthermore, his administrative approach went beyond just the tools. It extended to his written records. He kept detailed written timelines of his activities, meticulously drawn maps related to his stalking or the crime scenes themselves. And crucially, he wrote stories, self-authored narratives describing his acts, often in the third person.
Stories. He wasn't just committing the crime. He was generating the primary source documentation for it, crafting his own history in real time.
Precisely.
Why was authoring these narratives so important to his project management, as you put it?
Because for Rader, the crime itself felt incomplete without securing its legacy. The documentation solidified his dominance, not just over the victim's physical body in that moment, but over the historical narrative of the event itself.
He needed to control the story.
Yes. He was positioning himself in his mind as this godlike figure controlling his victim's fate. And, well, God needs scriptures, right? These written records, the photos, the trophies, they weren't just mementos, they were confirmation. Proof that his perverse project had been executed according to his specifications and was now ready for archiving.
The filing cabinet mentality wasn't just a quirk. It was the structural support for his entire sadistic enterprise.
That seems to be the core of it, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we've established Rader was driven by this relentless need for control, for order, for documentation. But eventually this administrative self-management, it wasn't enough on its own, was it? It needed an audience.
That's right. Like any author, perhaps, he craved recognition for his work. And that craving, that profound need for acknowledgement, is ultimately what led to his capture.
It's a common trait, isn't it? That need for acknowledgement in narcissistic personalities, especially in psychopathy.
It is. And Rader's ego, by all accounts, was enormous. He desperately needed the world to know how clever he was, how procedural, how much control he had. So between 1974 and 1979, relatively early in his activities, he started sending these cryptic, taunting letters.
Directly to who?
Directly to law enforcement and local media outlets. In these letters, he detailed aspects of his crimes, revealed his chosen alias BTK, and basically dared them to catch him.
So this correspondence, it wasn't just bragging like writing on a bathroom wall. It was demanding institutional acknowledgement, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And the title of one of his notes is perhaps the most revealing piece of evidence in the entire case about his motivation. It just lays bare his ego and this need for curation. He titled it, "How Many Do I Have to Kill Before I Get a Name in the Paper or Some National Attention?"
Wow, just blatant.
It's the ultimate indictment of his core motivation, isn't it? It shows the internal urge, the violence, might have even been secondary to the external validation he craved. He saw himself as this master criminal whose brilliant work was being criminally overlooked by the police and the press.
He didn't just want to terrorize, he wanted credit as the director of that terror.
Exactly. He wanted his name in the paper.
But then, after 1979, Rader abruptly went dormant. He stopped communicating, stopped killing, seemingly. He just blended right back into his life. Church leader, family man, issuing citations for messy yards in Park City. What happened? Why the silence for decades? And what prompted him to reemerge in 2004?
Well, the exact reasons for the dormancy aren't fully clear, but the reemergence in 2004 seems directly triggered by renewed media coverage. There were articles, maybe a documentary focus on the BTK cold case. His identity was still a total mystery after all those years. And seeing his work discussed again likely reignited that desperate, decades-old need for curation, for control over his own narrative. He had to remind the world, and maybe himself, that the author of those terrible acts was still out there, still watching, still controlling the story.
And this need to communicate his genius again, this final impulse to submit just one more piece of documentation for the file. This is where the meticulous bureaucratic system he'd relied on for 30 years finally betrayed him.
It's an incredible irony, isn't it? The man who mastered the analog world, the world of paper labels, physical binders, carefully stored trophies, he completely failed to grasp the invisible compliance rules of the emerging digital world.
The floppy disk.
The floppy disk. His fatal mistake was sending one containing his latest communications, trying to reestablish contact to the Wichita Eagle newspaper.
Okay, let's spend a moment on this mistake because it connects everything so perfectly. His administrative mindset directly led to his downfall. He thought he was communicating securely, right? Treating the disk like some anonymous drop.
He probably did. He was a man used to paper records. If you didn't write your name on it, if you delivered it anonymously, how could it be traced? That was his world.
So what did he miss about digital documentation? This was, what, 2004, 2005?
Early 2000s tech, yeah. He didn't realize that pretty much every document created on a computer, even back then, generated its own invisible internal documentation. We call it metadata.
Right, metadata. Explain that simply.
It's essentially the digital paper trail embedded within the file itself. Information like potentially the name of the user who last saved the document, the specific computer it was created or modified on, sometimes even the date and timestamps. Hidden administrative data.
So his own technology, the thing he was using to communicate, was automatically archiving the very details he'd spent 3 decades meticulously trying to conceal.
Exactly. These digital breadcrumbs, this metadata on the floppy disk he sent, trace the document back, specifically to a computer at the Park City Lutheran Church,
Where Dennis Rader was.
the president of the church council, and likely had unique access to that machine.
Well,
This single piece of administrative data, a detail he almost certainly never considered as part of his careful filing system, provided the direct, concrete link police needed to finally focus on him. It allowed them to obtain his DNA, match it to evidence from the crime scenes, and confirm his identity.
the ultimate bureaucrat of sadism, taken down by a violation of digital compliance rules he didn't even know existed.
It's almost poetic in a grim way.
The arrest itself, in 2005, it must have been just surreal for the people in Park City, his neighbors, his church community.
Oh, absolutely. He was apprehended just like the sources describe. This middle-aged, seemingly harmless neighbor who mowed his lawn, waved to police.
And kept trophies and binders at home. The decades-long administrative wall he'd built between his two lives just completely collapsed in an instant.
Total system failure for him.
Yeah.
Hashtag #SharkSRV, legacy and the psychopathy of the everyday man.
So the mask finally drops, Rader is arrested, but his procedural nature, that core administrative self, it didn't just vanish, did it?
Not at all.
The final step in his administrative process, you could argue, was the confession and the trial that followed. What was his demeanor like after the arrest? What did that reveal?
Post-arrest, and especially during the 2005 trial proceedings, Rader's composure was, well, perhaps the most shocking element for the public to witness. He confessed. He confessed to all 10 murders.
But how? Was he remorseful? Emotional?
Absolutely not. He confessed with utter detachment. The sources consistently characterize his descriptions of the crimes as being like he was reading a technical manual.
Just reading the procedure, the ultimate expression of the compliance officer.
Exactly. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't expressing guilt. There was no visible self-reflection. He was simply reviewing the procedure he had followed for each murder.
Step by step.
A completely sterile step-by-step account. He detailed the binding methods he used, the locations, the specific ways he took the photographs, how he disposed of evidence. all without any discernible emotion or remorse, just flat effect.
That chilling lack of empathy, the ability to describe these horrific acts as if they were, I don't know, zoning violations he was reporting on, that seems to be the hallmark of his specific psychopathy.
It really is. The procedure was paramount. The human cost was seemingly irrelevant to him.
He was eventually sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, no chance of parole, ensuring he would never manage another city's compliance code or, God forbid, another victim.
Right, locked away for good.
But importantly, the sources note that this administrative need, this urge to document and control the narrative, it didn't just stop when the prison gates closed, did it?
No, it hasn't. Rader is currently held in solitary confinement in Kansas, yet he continues his administrative project, so to speak. He writes letters. He sends documents to journalists, to criminologists, to authors writing about him. He is still actively attempting to shape, control, and document his own narrative, even from behind bars. For Dennis Rader, the project management of his own legacy is apparently ongoing. It never stopped.
That is truly chilling. Which brings us, I think, to the ultimate question we set out to explore today. Why does BTK stand out? Why is he such a deeply disturbing figure, even when you compare him to other notorious serial killers known for extreme brutality?
I think the psychological context Rader provides is crucial here. It's because he embodies what some have called the psychopathy of the everyday man.
The everyday man.
Yeah. He forced society, especially his local community, to confront a terrifying reality. That profound sadism and this obsessive need for control can be seamlessly embedded within the very systems of normalcy we rely on for safety and structure.
The family unit, the church, local government.
Exactly. These pillars of the community. He wasn't some obvious derelict, some marginalized figure lurking in the shadows. He was an integrated component of the system itself.
We tend to want evil to look evil, right? To be external, chaotic, easily identifiable. Rader he blows that up. He used meticulous control and calculated sadism to hide behind this clean-shaven, civic-minded facade for 30 years.
His ability to compartmentalize was frankly extraordinary. The same man, the compliance officer, who genuinely seemed to worry about the precise height of grass on someone's lawn, could, apparently with the flip of an internal switch, become the director of death.
But the underlying skill set was the same.
That's the disturbing part. Both roles required the same core skills: rule setting, organization, documentation, and the application of consequences. He just managed to separate the moral implications entirely from the procedural function. The what didn't matter as much as the how.
The sources, when they analyze his legacy, they often come back to this central theme of organization, don't they? He represents order, but inverted, twisted.
Absolutely. That analogy is perfect. He didn't look like chaos in human form. He was something perhaps more unsettling. He was order turned inside out.
How so?
He took the most mundane, the most reassuring organizational principles of his everyday municipal life, documentation, rule setting, compliance checks, archiving, and he meticulously applied them to the darkest, most horrific acts imaginable.
Proving that bureaucracy itself, that relentless focus on procedure, can be weaponized, can be a tool for unspeakable cruelty.
It suggests that the structure itself isn't inherently good. It depends entirely on the intent of the administrator. #outro.
Okay, so let's try to synthesize the most potent insights from this deep dive. The defining feature of Dennis Rader, the key knowledge we really extract from these sources, it isn't just the brutality of his crimes, it's the bureaucratic, administrative execution of that brutality. That's what makes the banal, civic-minded facade so utterly terrifying.
Yeah, we've really unpacked how Rader's massive narcissistic ego demanded total control, and how that need manifested in these two parallel, highly structured lives. The microcontrol he wielded as a compliance officer managing city codes.
Lawn heights and stray dogs.
Right. It was structurally identical in terms of process to the macro control of the sadist managing every detail of his victim's final moments. Both sides were organized, detailed, documented, and ultimately utterly self-serving. He never stopped being the project manager.
It really does change the way you might look at the relentless pursuit of order, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And how authority, even on the most local, mundane level, can potentially be twisted to satisfy a profoundly dark impulse hiding underneath.
It certainly makes you think, and that connects back to his current situation, right? His continued need for control, even locked away in solitary.
Exactly. And that really is the final provocative thought we want to leave you with today. Building on this core idea of Rader as the bureaucrat of sadism, if his entire identity, his pathology, was defined by this procedural need for ultimate control and documentation.
Hmm.
And he's still there, incarcerated, still writing letters, still trying to manage the public perception of his history, still filing his reports, essentially. What does this ongoing correspondence tell us about his ultimate, perhaps unachievable goal?
Does the project ever end for him?
Right. Is the final filing cabinet entry for the project known as BTK ever truly complete? Does the bureaucrat of sadism ever grant himself final compliance? Or is the process itself the destination? Something to think about.